Home Studio Recording, The Complete Guide is a brand new book covering everything from pre-production, recording session engineering, recording techniques for every instrument out there, selecting equipment, budget-friendly gear versus classic studio pieces, plugins, mixing, mastering, and even releasing music. It is the quintessential guide to home and professional studio recording. Now, I'm fortunate enough to call one of the authors a personal friend of mine, so we got together to chat about the book and discuss music, gear elitism, AI technology, the future of the industry, and of course, his inspiration and goals for the book. Settle in and enjoy some pearls of wisdom from the most positive ambassador in our industry, Mr. Warren Huart. All right, Warren, welcome to the channel. First of all, just congratulations on putting together what has to be the most in-depth, detailed, and expansive book.
Thank you.
And contribution back to the music industry and to everyone aspiring to succeed in the industry. It's a very positive, there's so much positivity in the book. That was what stuck out for me. So what is your goal with the book? What do you want to achieve?
Well, firstly, I obviously have to, with all humility, I have to give a big shout out to Jerry Hammock.
Yes.
I did this with Jerry. It might be my brain with ideas and stuff. Without an organized genius like Jerry Hammock to help put this thing together, it never would have got done. Jerry is responsible for all those books on the Beatles recording. I think there is 5 in the series. And they're super in-depth. So I knew when I approached him to do the book with him, I was going to get a brain that could take all of my ideas and really super focus it. So shout out to Jerry. So we started it literally for that reason. When I started Produce Like a Pro, the channel, I realized that, all of this gear you see behind me had been accumulated by me working in the industry. I didn't go to music school. I didn't assist at a big studio. I just did it the way that everybody has to now, like yourself. You just kind of, I'm going to be in the music industry, and you just start working your ass off. You came up as a drummer and you turned that into a PA company and a YouTube channel, educational things. You are a living example of what people have to do. And I thought to myself, when I came up that way, 15, 20 years before you did it, that was not the accepted way. And I was like, oh, wow. I need to put that together in a YouTube channel. And then, of course, the book was always something that I wanted to do. And I've been doing it a long time. This took 3 years to write. And in 3 years...
And it'll probably take us 3 years to read it. It's huge.
It was 475 pages. We have the wonderful Richard Oliver went through and paginated this essentially, and just got it cleaned up. Not so much the editing, but the way that he has laid this out. It's so clearly done. So thank you, Richard. Basically, it's a combination of a lot of very, very talented people. I have my name first on it, but there's so many people that got involved in doing this that are really, really super smart. For me, it's about everything. It's recording oboe through to death metal and everything in between. Violins, violas, drums, orchestras, brass, metal guitars, rock guitars, mixing them.
Exquisite detail into the approach to doing each task. It's not like saying, put a 57 on it and just, on every single chapter. It's, no, these microphones are good. This type of microphone's good. Something that impressed me actually was such a wide variety of hardware and plugins and microphones. And with a book like this, I would imagine some people might be tempted to go down the route of, okay, we're going to get endorsed by the biggest plugin company and they can pay me X amount of thousands of pounds to only feature their plugins in this book. And you've definitely not done that. It's covering everything, really up-to-date products, really up-to-date plugins, up-to-date hardware, 500 series, where the influence for the modern stuff comes from, the classic pieces. It's just it's a gearhead's wet dream of a book.
Oh, thank you ever so much. Ed, I really, really appreciate that. I do talk about all the different kinds of mics that I use, and some of them are new. There's a couple of handful of microphone companies in there that I feature that I love. You're right. We kept this incredibly as objective as possible. Like, for instance, I'm talking about the PreSonus Revelation USB microphone here. I don't actually use this on a day-to-day basis, but we did our research and found out that was a wonderful microphone to talk about in an inexpensive world. I've they've never done any content with me or anything like that. But it's not about that. This book is about actually giving a balanced, objective view of what we do for a living. And you're right. I didn't want to be tied to any companies. I wanted to take the best of everything. One of the things I was really excited about was with all of the hundreds and hundreds of interviews I've done with all my friends, producers, engineers, and mixers, and people I just get introduced to through what we do, I've found a common sense of what people love and why they love it, and I try to put all of that in here. So this is an accumulated, not just of my knowledge, but of all of those incredible producers, engineers, and mixers that I've talked to. I realized that there are certain pieces of equipment you can buy for bang for the buck that help your client base feel like, oh, this guy or girl knows what they're doing. And that's in there as well. Yes, you can spend thousands of dollars on that, but you don't need to. You could buy this instead. There's also a lot of emphasis on, and this is probably why we didn't go to manufacturers, another reason, there's a lot of emphasis on buying used equipment as well. Like there's certain things that you can buy used that you don't need to go out and buy brand new that will give you bang for the buck, give you results. It really is exactly what it says, the home studio recording, the complete guide. We wanted it to cover everything. And also we talked to book publishers and realized we needed to be nimble. We need to do a revision. Let's just say we want to do a revision in a year or two. We needed to be able to do that ourselves and publish it ourselves, add things to it, put in new chapters, change things up. When something new comes out, feature that we think is going to be life-changing, gear changing, music changing. It's got to be something that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. All the nice things you said mean the world to me. And we've been blessed. Everybody that's reviewed it has just been awesome about it.
Yeah, interesting point regarding updating the book, because I think you've released it at an interesting time, because over the last decade or so, we've had this incredible pace of development with, high-end technology filtering down to home studio technology and developments in technology in general. I can't imagine there being a time that we're going to ever see such rapid advancement in home studio technology again. What would you think?
Yeah, I agree entirely. I've had so many conversations about it. We went to the P&A wing party the other night for the Grammys, and then we went to East West. And the East West party was just fantastic, and it had so many, producers, engineers, just people, studio owners, all hanging out, and the overwhelming conversation when we get all gear orientated, which of course all of us guys like you and I do when we get together, we start getting all super nerdy. There's no more discussion. People were saying to me, have you noticed, Warren, that nobody's talking about tape anymore in the same ways? It's like it was a debate 5-10 years ago. There was such a massive debate about things that have just kind of fizzled out. Because everybody that is a professional in our business now realizes they can get the same results, and the flexibility and the recallability of where the industry is moving is so much better, and it outweighs all of those old arguments. Now, we all love tape for a sonic reason, but we also like tape because it encourages people to get into a room and perform together and then come back and listen down and realize it's not fixable digitally, so they have to maybe get better at their instrument, get a better feel, get groove together, all of that. That's never going to go away, that once in a lifetime capturing the performance idea. However, you can do that in digital as well. You can take the philosophy of that and apply it. And that's what this talks about. It talks about all of the lessons learned from the way things are recorded like they used to be to the way recorded now. We talk about all the best of everything. It's a balanced view of it. We went out, we got everybody's books on the subject, and we looked at everybody, and there's some wonderful, wonderful books, and went like, we have to do everything that they have done and more. This has to be the book. It can't just be another book. It has to be the book in this area. And guys like you are heavily influential because we see about what you talk about and what goes on your channel. We looked at what are the discussion points? What do people really want to know? And that's what we put into the book, as opposed to sort of being self-righteous and elitist, because there's too much of that in our industry, as we know. We're trying to bring people together. And that's the reason why we called it the Home Studio Recording, the Complete Guide, and didn't make it like, the studio or whatever. Because you just pointed out, now, with a limited amount of equipment, you can make an album which sounds as good as anything recorded in any major studio. I mean, the reality is one decent condenser, a 57, any affordable interface, because we all know that they all share the same chip now. The secret is out. Your $500 interface probably has the same internal conversion as the $5,000 interface. It's just the stuff that goes around it. You know, there's a lot. You get some of those beautiful analog sounding ones. Well, that's because they got tons of really expensive transformers and beautiful electronics in the way. But the conversion is being done by the same chip as that inexpensive one. So we have realized that there is so many advantages now of what we've got. The only thing stopping us is the creativity. And that's what we're about. Like, let's encourage the creativity. Let's help people make amazing music, and not make it all about the pitfalls of like, you need a Q1 5i7-9 connected to an 894241 boosted at blah, blah, blah. Yeah, those things are nice. Knowing all your gear really well is great. But let's level the playing field, and that's what we wanted to do here.
I think what's really good about it is it's accessible, much like the Produce Like a Pro Academy, it's accessible to everyone, whether you're an absolute beginner learning what an audio interface is for the first time, or whether you're more experienced or highly professional. But there's one very good quote in there which goes, "Recording is in great measure an art, and in art there are no experts." And I see that as a very encouraging sentiment for anyone thinking, well, I've not got the work experience working in Abbey Road, or I've not got, a decade of experience mixing, or, I actually don't know my music theory. How can I do this? All those people with doubts. The theme throughout the book is just sheer encouragement and positivity, which,
thank you.
As much as I know of you personally, that's you in a nutshell, isn't it?
Oh, thanks for saying that. Yeah, we were talking off camera a little bit about this. To me, I've said this quite often, and I'll reiterate it. One of the best things that ever happened to me was growing up super poor in a really wealthy area. And it gave me a chip on the shoulder, and it made me push against stuff. I'll own it. But it also makes I resonate with people like me, and most people are like us. We didn't have multimillionaire families and stuff like that. So, and that's a very small echelon. It's like I can't remember. When I first moved to America, I thought everybody in America was so much more wealthy than us. And then I read it was actually 1% or 2% of people make $250,000 or more a year. So I was like, I thought that was going to be like 30% of the population,
Yeah.
And I realized that most people in this world are living in this kind of like, I wouldn't say in a state of poverty, but they're living in the middle classes. And so having $100,000 worth of equipment is not possible. I've got that now, but I got that from just working really, really super hard, from 4-track cassettes to ADATs to eventually getting into a DAW, which of course for me is Pro Tools, but it could be any DAW. And that's super, super important to me to remember how my journey was. And also think about, you just touched on Abbey Road, yes, but I think one of the things is Revolver was recorded by Jeff Emmerich when he was 19. I think he may have turned 20 during the process, but 19, 20-year-old, kid in reality, first real proper engineering album gig. He'd engineered some songs, but here he is with the Beatles, the biggest band in the world. And he is making Revolver, which inarguably is in the top 2 greatest albums of all time. Sometimes it's number 1, sometimes it's number 2, sometimes it's Pet Sounds, whatever you want to say. But most people, when they talk about albums, consider that to be one of the greatest pieces of production and engineering ever. How can we say that a 19, 20-year-old guy has got enough acquired knowledge to make that album? If you were to go and listen to other people, we won't say who they are in our industry, they would say, well, you really have to know this, and you have to know this, and you have to know that. He didn't know any of that stuff. When I asked him about the D19, we didn't get on camera because it was at a lunch. I asked him about this microphone. Everybody knows this microphone. This is the Akg D19. This is like AKG's what would now be considered like a 57. Obviously, it was predated the 57. But it is a good-sounding, generic, dynamic microphone. This microphone might be worth $700 or something, which is quite silly because it's just essentially an inexpensive dynamic microphone. When I asked him why he used it, because he used it on overheads, on drums. Yeah. He used it on acoustic guitars. He used it on vocals. Yep. I think there's even instances where he used it on a bass.
I recognise it on a lot of the Beatles broadcasts.
Yeah. Yeah. I said, why did you use it? And he goes, because it was plugged in. John in particular is very famous, asked Jack Douglas about it. If he had an idea, which is many artists, if he has an idea and he wants to get it down, the engineer's going to go, oh, wait there, let me just send down to the mic locker and get the Q15974, because I think that's going to have the better frequency response, blah, 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 blah. It's John Lennon. He wants to put the idea down. Those guys would go into the studio, especially in the early mid days, not the Let It Be days. They would go in there like from 10 a.m. to 6, and they had like a certain amount of hours to put down a single and get it recorded and mixed. It wasn't like, well, let's audition 55 different microphones and find out what the best one is for the acoustic overdub that you want to do. He would just go, it's plugged in, and he'd just go, put it around on the mic, on the acoustic guitar and start tracking it.
Yeah, it's similar. I get asked all the time, what's the best interface? And my first response is the one you have when inspiration strikes, because it doesn't matter if you've got one coming in the post. If the idea is now, you're going to have forgotten it in 20 seconds time. Get it down now.
So it's getting that balance. It's taking that information, knowing what the best tool is for the job, and balancing it with affordability. So yes, we'll talk about why U47 is a great microphone, but we'll also give it a really huge balance of like, what is your budget? What can you get for that? That's what's really important.
Yeah, that really stood out, because it's as someone who's trying to start pushing my mixing studio, I'm researching other websites and other studios and other engineers. And there's definitely a culture of tech, how can we describe this? Tech expectations where, if a studio doesn't have a Neve, doesn't have a U87, doesn't have an Apollo or something, various things like that. It's kind of if you're talking about brands that aren't as well known, there's a certain judgment, I feel, from certain areas, certain industries, certain people. Whereas this book is highlighting for us, actually, it's not necessary. So it is giving people the confidence. You don't need a Neve. There are other preamps. Interface preamps are so much better than they used to be. It's positivity throughout the book, which really struck me.
Thank you ever so much. You and I are both fans of the company Audium. We like the product, but we also like the people behind it, and that really helps. So we're fans of their stuff. Not to say that other people don't make great interfaces. We talk about them too. But one of the things I like about the Audium is the mic pre is good and pretty darn neutral. The reason why I like certain microphone companies, why I've highlighted Lewitt and other companies, Mojave, there's so many, I don't want to just pick on a company, is because now we're moving into a world where the coloration is being created at the mix process, or at least it's in the tracking process using the plugins that you're going through. And that accessibility is huge. I remember about 8 years ago when I first started Produce Like a Pro, I got a wonderful interview, and I'm blanking on who it was. Somebody interviewed me for their podcast, and their question was, Warren, what does it feel like now that you can now have 50 instances of any reverb or delay or compressor when you first started making records, you maybe had one or two of those at your fingertips? And I was like, what a freaking huge point. Because when I used to go into a studio, you had an SSL or a Neve or whatever, and you have 4 or 6 auxiliaries. So with those 4 or 6 auxiliaries, you could access their 2 or 3 lexicon, reverbs, or their digital delay line, their Roland, whatever it was. You had all these, or maybe a tape echo, maybe a plate, maybe an echo chamber. And so you would sit there with the 6 auxiliaries and your 6 multi-effects that you have and say, well, can I use the same reverb on the snare that I'm going to use on the electric? Probably not. So I better use, this is the reverb for the electric guitars, like all the electric guitars. Here's the snare reverb. Here's the vocal reverb. Maybe I can put the BVs in there. The point is now I'm going, well, I could have a different reverb for the snare that I have on the toms, that I have on the kick, that I have on the electric guitar, this electric guitar part, that electric guitar part. We're in a world now where the creativity is just so open to us, and it can all be done inside of your DAW. And what our tools should be is capturing accurate results that then can be molded in any direction we want. Now, don't get me wrong. If you've got the budget and you buy a microphone or a mic pre that shapes the sound on the way in, that's amazing. I love that too. Of course, I own lots of those kinds of things. But it's that reality. It's about presenting somebody with all of the options, going, okay, you've got $3,000 to spend. Here's some beautiful mic pre's that you could buy that would do it. But if you've only got $3,000 for everything in your whole studio, then why not get this with this, this, and this? If you've got $500, just get this. It's balancing it out and presenting it in a really objective way, rather than coming from an opinion of only this works or only that idea. That's the philosophy, I think, of what we're all about, and it's definitely that same philosophy in the book. Just bring everybody together. Let's bring everybody together under one roof and realize that we're all in music because we love music, not because one thing is better or worse than the other.
Hey there, just wanted to interrupt the interview to let you know that fellow YouTuber Paul Third and I are doing a weekly podcast for Produce Like a Pro, where we mix songs from the Produce Like a Pro Academy library of multi-tracks and then review and compare each other's mixes, trading notes and techniques and a bit of banter as we go. Paul and I are both on a journey to become full-time studio mix engineers ourselves, which I think makes the podcast highly relatable and hopefully inspiring. Joining the Produce Like a Pro Academy gives you access to the multi-tracks that we're mixing for you to practice your mixing and develop your portfolio. A link to join is in the description below. The podcast is, of course, free and available on all good hosting websites, and also link below. Right, let's get back to it. Another quote that stood out in the book is, "It's not possible to be an expert in the traditional sense," which, as you discuss in the introduction, is outlaying that in the former days you had someone whose specialist job was engineering, someone's specialist job was mixing, someone's specialist job was producing, mastering. Nowadays, all those things are very much blurred into one, and we have to be not an expert, but we have to be sufficient in so many styles. It's almost like being a jack of all trade is now making you the master of what you're doing, whereas though before a jack of all trades could never be a master of one, but now you kind of have to be.
Well, yes, absolutely. I've got a good analogy. When I was in my early 20s, I had record deals and all that kind of stuff, but I had this job that I took on full time, and I worked in the print industry for a few years. So I was actually playing in bands. I'd had record deals. I started doing printing because it actually made me real money. And it was just at the time when this thing called DTP took over, desktop publishing. And I see exactly the same analogy that happened in print that would happen in music. So what happens is we have tools come out that make things easier, but they're not quite ready yet. And so there's a big backlash against them. Like early digital sounded really abrasive. But also, as Tommy Vicari said, people were recording the same way that they did on tape on digital. He said he watched people boosting high end into digital, then saying it sounded too bright. And he's like, you don't have to do that with digital. You do that with tape because when it plays back, it sounds dull. So you overdo it going in. And when it comes back, you used to boost more high end to get it to sound like what the original source did. He goes, people were doing things, thinking like tape. They were hitting it too hard. They were distorting it because they were used to going really, really hard to tape to get that sound they wanted. And so there was a lot of a learning curve, like you're talking about, that kind of thing. Now, and I think you're making a great point and raising an amazing thing, is that now the technology has got to such a high level that it is making certain jobs obsolete, or it's making them so easy to do that the skill level is not quite required. I think it was Merrick or something at Abbey. I think it was Merrick the other day telling me about Abbey Road, that the way that they would take for somebody from a runner to an assistant engineer was, could they put a tape on a 24 track or a 16 track properly? They're like, go put the tape on. You know, you had to have done it 50 times, 100 times. And the opportunities you would get in a studio might be once or twice a day. Maybe they're using one 20-minute roll of tape. Maybe they get to go through 2 reels in that one day. So for somebody to be really good at it, they would have had to have done it. They've had to have worked in a studio maybe hundreds of days and all that stuff to be second nature to them. So that was a really good way to test what kind of experience they got. Somebody comes in and goes, yeah, I'm pretty experienced. You should hire me as an engineer. They're like, cool, go put that tape up. And if you see them kind of like struggling, they're like, yeah, you're BSing. You know, you haven't done this 100 times.
I'd love to know what the equivalent of that is.
Well, that's the reality, isn't it? It's probably mic up a drum kit.
And get it in phase. Mic up a drum kit and get it in phase.
And it's probably a similar amount of hours of experience, because to change a tape once or twice during a session and to do that 100 times is a lot of hours of work. It means that you have proven that you've been sitting in a studio for 8 to 15 hours a day for 100 times. Now, to get a drum kit up in phase, probably the same result, isn't it? It means that you've done 100 days of sitting in a studio for 8 to 15 hours a day. Yeah, you're probably right.
So I feel the book equips everyone with the knowledge and skills for music production, engineering, recording, even releasing music thus far. Where do you see the music industry going? Again, I feel the book is a beacon of light and positivity in an industry otherwise flailing in the dark, slow to react and adapt, fulfilling its own demise as we speak, you know, with touring becoming so expensive, streaming, in theory, diminishing people's incomes. However, it's better than, you know, Pirate Bay as of previous years, which is where streaming came from. 360 deals with record labels, and like I said, expensive touring. It's eating into bands' profits, yet the labels are still taking loads of money. For example, with one streaming platform, they take 70% of anything that platform makes, which was a surprising statistic I heard when I found that out. So the labels are still getting the money. The bands are struggling. I'm seeing famous people on social media regularly saying, well, I can't afford to tour because the venues I do, I'm going to come out with £100 a night, which for some people, is still a gig wage in London, for example. I know that at several venues. But for these kind of artists, that's just not sustainable. So how do you feel this book kind of relates to preparing people for an industry that, I don't want to say struggling because I think that's negative. You're a lot more positive on this than I am. But how do you feel it sets people up for an industry that is difficult and not as much of the money is trickling down from the record labels as it used to?
Well, that's an amazing question. You need the tools. It's about giving you the tools to be able to navigate this industry. But I think it's a wonderful point. There's a lot of discussion of this. You're right. There's more money in the music industry today than there's ever been in the history of the world. Record companies are making more money than they've ever made. And in fact, some platforms, they make 85% of every dollar that's generated. 70% might only be certain ones. There are some that pay 85% of every single cent goes to the rights holders. So there is money being made, more money than ever. The reality is it's crowded. It is so crowded with people trying to get into the industry, where the industry that I grew up on, and even you grew up on when you were a child, was not like that. It was feast or famine. I remember I played in club bands, and you're right, we used to get like £100 a night. And I moved to the north of England when I was 16 years old, and I played in club bands, and we would get sometimes less, sometimes £80, but about £80 to £100 a night. When £80 to £100 a night was actually a decent amount of money.
Is that per musician?
No, per band.
Per band. I was going to say, so there's still venues paying £100 a night per musician, which is the same it was when I started playing professionally 15 years ago, which I know for a fact my rent and bills and fuel has doubled in that time, yet my gig rates haven't.
So you're right. Money has barely gone up. That was in the north of England, maybe in the south. But you were doing only weekend gigs when I moved back down. And yes, the money was a little bit better. But we were gigging 3 to 4 to 5 nights a week. And we were making enough money to live better than the dole and pay our rent. And we were happy. And we were doing covers and slipping in 1 or 2 of our own songs. And that to me was a wonderful way to learn how to be a musician. And also recording our own demos, and we had 4-track recorders, and I was learning how to engineer, I was learning how to write, I was getting better at my instrument. I have no problems with that. But the reality is like, as you're pointing out, those gigs have evaporated. You're competing against so much modern technology that you really have to think about how you can be different. And I think that we try to address all of those things. For me, like if I was starting a band now, I would really figure out how to do acoustic versions of everything. Because like 2 acoustic guitars and a vocal or something like that can provide a beautiful listening experience. You have to be creative about what are you going to do that you can make money at that works in all these different environments. If there is no pubs with big PA systems anymore putting on bands, what are you going to do? How can you adapt? And so it's a massive question, absolutely massive question. But I like it. I like the question. Maybe we should do a whole series of videos on how to compete and make money in the modern industry. There are multiple ways. Understand your audience. Make music for your audience. There's so many things. It's not just a case of doing your brilliance and putting it out to the world and sitting back and going, why am I not rich?
That's where I've been going wrong, Warren.
But you know what I mean? It's there's so much to talk about. It's like, who are you trying to speak to? What is your audience? How do you communicate with them? You've got to get, what are the blogs? What are the forums that showcase what you do? What the great thing about the old music industry is they relied on the radio and they put out a song and they put it on the radio. The point is there's a lot of rock bands that make amazing living that aren't household names because they're very targeted. They know who they're speaking to. I think even going back to the late 80s and early 90s, I remember Iron Maiden. It's a quite famous story. Maybe it's been ignored now so many years later, but Iron Maiden put out an album that went to #1 in the UK the first week, and then by the second week wasn't in the top 40, and then by the third week wasn't even in the top 100. The reason why that's an important thing is because Iron Maiden had a massive fan base, that knew when the album came out. They knew how to target it. They had the right ads. They were in the right places at the right time. And every single Iron Maiden fan, like 200,000, whatever it might be around the world, went out and bought that album the first week it came out because they're huge fans.
Yeah.
The point is like that's a good living for any artist, but they were targeted and they knew what to do. That's part of our challenge. And it's hard work.
So I have to ask, while I've got you talking about the music industry, how do you feel about AI and where do you see the future going? Because now you can virtually AI EQ everything, AI compress, AI reverb, AI master. I think there's a plugin you can put on every single channel in it, AI mixers.
I've tried a lot of these things out. I don't know if I've tried them all out yet, but I've tried a lot of them out. And the results are giving me adequate results.
Right.
They're adequate. The results are adequate. There you go.
But they're adequate for now. I mean, do you think we might move into a phase where they're going to be more than adequate and a threat and we have to evolve somehow? Or do you think that human touch, whether it be creativity in writing or creativity in mixing, and that emotional touch is always going to have the upper hand?
Well, great question. First of all, when I say adequate, not good enough to release.
Right.
It's just they're adequate, meaning if you're somebody who's at a very, very beginner level or early on in your career, or you're not a producer, an engineer, a mixer, but you're an artist, that's probably good for somebody who's not a producer, an engineer, or mixer, but is a really talented artist, and they want to get their song idea down, and they're still learning their DAW, but they're really actually quite a good, talented musician. They'll probably enjoy it because it will give them an adequate result. It will give them something which is balanced. The reality is like, I'll name drop this one. I was talking to Bob Clearmountain about this exact same thing, so you can bypass my opinion and go to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about.
Right.
Inarguably the greatest mixer in the world.
Yeah,
I mean, all of the guys that get called great mixers, when you talk to them, they're all like, Bob Clearmountain's the best. Like all of them. Chris Algie thinks Bob Clearmountain's the best.
Yeah.
You know, it's like everybody thinks Bob's the best, and he has zero ego, and we love him dearly. I was asking exactly the same question that you posed, and we came to a complete agreement with this. He said, the problem is, and I agree with this 100%, is everything sounds so soft and nice and perfect now. We have all these incredible tools, and if we rely on them, everything is balanced and perfect, and oh my God, that vocal's so smooth. But the problem with everything being soft and perfect is it's soft and perfect. And when you're 13, and I think 13 is a good watershed age for, at least for guys, you know. I think for girls it's actually a little earlier because they mature quicker than us. But for a guy, you remember about 13 is when you start really kind of going, rock or metal or dance music or something. You don't want soft and nice and perfect. You actually like crunch, distorted, wrong. You want all of that kind of stuff. So I don't know where our AI fits into that, because that is all human beings doing something wrong, sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately, sometimes a combination of the both. But the wrongness, that's going to be a really hard one to factor into cutting edge music. I mean, what you're talking about is not just AI, it's just the way music is viewed. There's many YouTube channels that are lauding perfection or lauding cleverness or putting down music because it didn't, oh my God, they used a 6/4-1/5. That's the worst thing ever in the whole world. It's like, is it? Is it? 99% of the biggest songs in the world are 1, 4, and 5. They're built around, we're just joking about C, F, and G. Some of the greatest songs are written about that. Some of the greatest songs are 2 chords. Some of the greatest songs are 4. And then Bohemian Rhapsody is the exact opposite of that. But that doesn't make the simplicity of something invalid. There's so much more to music than the technology that we're talking about. There's the passion. There's what are you trying to say? Like I was talking about with the Sam Cooke song. A Change Is Gonna Come is one of the most important songs of all time, and it's still played to this day because of that. And it doesn't really have anything to do with anything, to do with any kind of technical aspect or chord sequence or whatever. It's bigger and better than that. So I think the AI, at best, could come to a place where it cuts down the time it takes to do menial tasks, which isn't that everything? I bring it on because otherwise we're arguing about, wax cylinders versus Atmos, immersive mixing. It's a foolish discussion for us to have, isn't it, if we start taking it back to that point? I mean, it really is what's better, a wax cylinder or immersive audio when you're sitting in a room where Bob Clearmountain is. My wife and I went to Bob's house the other day, and he played us Foo Fighters' "We Will Rock You" with our friend Luke Spiller singing, from the Struts. It's spiritual how good it was. First of all, Luke channels Freddie Mercury perfectly. Doesn't hurt that Brian May's also the guitar player, Roger Taylor's the drummer, and all these incredible musicians recorded, by Bob Clearmountain in Wembley Stadium with a whole crowd. But the way it was done, that immersive experience, you're sitting there, you're watching it, and you feel like you're in Wembley Stadium. And there's so much incredible technology that allowed that to happen that probably 10, 15, 20 years ago would have been argued by people of why do you need that? Well, you know why you need it? Because that's the results when in the right hands. So I think it all comes down to all of the technologies, even with the auto-tune discussion, isn't it? That I know you agree with this. Auto-tune's a good tool in the right hands. In the wrong hands, it's horrible. And if somebody uses AI that's a beginner, it's amazing because they're taking something which is horrible and unlistenable and making it adequate and good enough for anybody to use. And if the AI technology gets to a point where it's really, really good, in the hands of Bob Clearmountain, it's going to be amazing. In somebody else's hands, it will probably be abused and boring and dull and average. And everybody will say, oh, AI sucks because it doesn't make my mixes sound like Bob Clearmountain mixed.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing that's really coming out of the Work in Audio Tools podcast with Paul Third. We have very different approaches. I have, some lovely analog gear. I mix on speakers. He mixes purely in the box with headphones. It's not the gear. It is absolutely the person using it. We have every week, it's a very different sounding mix, good things about each, and we highlight the good things and we highlight the things that we maybe could have done differently. And it's a really positive experience for both of us learning from each other, but also hopefully giving other people an insight that, it doesn't matter that I've got API EQs. It doesn't make a difference because Paul's doing it with FabFilter or something, and he's arguably achieving, the same, very similar, and often better results. It is absolutely, as you've said, down to who is using, which brings us back to the book, I think, quite nicely, because it's such a fantastic educational resource to teach people how to use the tools that they've got to be the best that they can. And like I've said a few times, it's such a positive volume of work. But just, I think, to summarize, if there was one thing you want people to take away from the book, what would that be?
First of all, it's a complete and utter labor of love. It's something that I've always wanted to do. It's what the channel's about, but the channel is now 2,028 videos. So it's a lot of different discussions going on. This is all of that philosophy of 2,028 videos in one place. So for me, it's taking everything that I firmly believe about music and the way it's recorded and put into one place. It's really super important for me because music means so much to so many of us. And those of us like yourself that are in the music industry, at whatever level, are all here because we love music. Because at some point in our life, something happened and we went, Ping. For me, it was my dad just growing up with classical music and jazz, and then my dad giving me A Night at the Opera when I was 7 years old for Christmas and said, this is worthy.
Worthy, wow.
Yes.
What a choice of words for that record.
Well, because he was a classical and jazz guy, for him it was like there was a high echelon of music. Right. And then Queen come out in, 75 with Bohemian Rhapsody, and he's like, whoa, this is amazing. He didn't say that. My dad would never use words like amazing. Worthy was as good as it got. He was very, very British, and very subdued, quite frankly. Would only talk about things that were important. I'm sure you know that style of older British male where if it was, my dad had no small talk, didn't know how to do it. Couldn't have this conversation. You'd have got 5 words out of him. But the reality is that was such a huge feeling and it sparked off everything that was to come after. I still remember that moment so well. What was it for you? Can you remember any particular thing or combined things that made you just want to be in music that you just that you can go back to and remember that's what sparked it off?
We had a music teacher who brought in a drum kit to school and showed everyone something to play, and I was impressed by the sound and the volume, and I thought there was something rebellious in that. And he sat everyone down to play, and everyone else struggled. And I think I made sure I went last just to observe everyone else. And then
Smart.
Sat down, played what he had asked everyone to play first time. It made sense to me. And then I think there was a cowbell and I added something on that and everyone was like, whoa, Ed's really got this. And I was like, oh, cool. So in a competitive school where I was average to useless at everything else, all of a sudden I wasn't. And I thought, I quite like this. And then I couldn't unhear drums on every record. And back then for me, it was Michael Jackson. There may have been a Spice Girls CD in the house somewhere. My parents
can neither confirm nor deny.
My parents had everything from ABBA to Led Zeppelin to Dire Straits, which really caught my attention. And
Nice.
And then it was, Oasis came out, and that was just gnarly guitars, attitude on the vocals like nothing else. Drums you could barely hear in the mix, so I'd struggle to but I literally taught myself for a year playing along to Oasis records.
Oh, but Live Forever. I love that Live Forever drum part, yeah.
Yeah, and then, from there it was, someone showed me Metallica, Dave Matthews Band, Dream Theater, and my mind was just blown at each one of those records. The Offspring, the speed of that. I remember thinking everything on Dookie from Green Day was really fast, and then by the time I got to about 20, I was like, this is all right. Yeah, just amazing those days when those experiences are the first time you're hearing.
Oh yeah,
stuff like that.
Absolutely love that. I'm doing a EDM academy. Just taking time to doing it with Matt Lang, and I'm doing it with Chris Alba from Cult Creators, which is like a big branding company. But he was a DJ for years.
Cool,
an amazing personality, and a manager called Matt Simpson. So we're doing this all based around that world. And the reason why I'm doing it is because I want to be 13 again. I'm sure you relate to this. I don't want to be that guy. I watch the Wagging Finger channels, and sometimes the Wagging Finger channels are talking about songs I love, and that's fantastic. But I also don't want to be that older guy telling off the kids that you kids don't know, you don't understand. Back in the 1970s, music was better. It's like there was some amazing music in the 1970s. There's also amazing music now. It's like, for me, it's like, gun to my head, it's going to be Queen, it's going to be Bowie, it's going to be Pink Floyd. Sure. Of course it is. It's never going to go away. But it's also going to be, Muse are pretty freaking amazing. Radiohead, of course, are absolutely amazing. But then, I heard a Kendrick Lamar thing the other day, which I just thought was so unbelievable. It's like, we've got to balance it out. We've got to understand that there's still people making music that are trying to say things and are doing a really good job of it. And music is not just about, as you and I know, about the technical and all this kind of stuff. Music brings people together. It kicks down barriers. Like good literature, good music, good art. That's the feeling. When you're telling me that you feel the book feels positive and supportive, that means a lot to me, because that is really what we've always been about since the beginning. Not about dividing people and saying one way is better than the other. No, whether you do EDM, whether you do classical, whether you do jazz, whether you do death metal, whether you do classic rock, whether you do folk, doesn't matter what music you do, we're speaking to you. It's about everybody learning together and finding, I love the quote, look for the similarities, not the differences.
I wrote a note saying there's emphasis on giving each instrument their due in a track. My natural tendency, I think, from doing live sound for many years, is to make sure everything can be heard all the time. And only in a solo is one instrument dominant over the others. But picking and choosing which to focus on can be a musical approach to mixing, which, again, is something Paul and I have discussed in the podcast.
Super important what you just said there. Yeah. Well, I was watching a video early on when I just started YouTube, and I was watching lots of, other people's successful videos, just thinking, like, what are they talking about? What should I talk about? Because I was completely clueless when I started, just did what I did. One of the videos is actually quite a 1 million+ video done by somebody we all know and love. And I really felt like they misstated something. They were like, make sure when you mix to make everything, audible. Everything should be audible. Everything should be almost, they didn't say equal volume, but like make sure that every part. And I was just like, as a producer and having worked with so many incredible artists, that is completely wrong. Sometimes we all know if you're doing heavy guitars, octaves, low octaves, following the chord sequence on a piano is the best way, or one of the best ways, to get those grung, grung, grung guitars to come out. It's not audible. You will not know there is a piano in there. If you mute the piano, you'll be like, where's all the low end thickness of those guitars gone? So to me, it was like things like that. Also, when I've got like a beautiful like arpeggiated guitar, when it goes high, I might play a lower octave below it, but blend it so it's inaudible until I mute it. As soon as I mute it, the guitar got thin. I put it back in. You don't notice that there's actually an octave underneath reinforcing it and pushing it forward. Vocal thickening tricks where you detune the vocal, blend it underneath, pushes the vocal forward. You mute it, you're like, oh, the vocal just sat back in the track. You put it in, you don't know what happened. If that was audible, you'd be like, why is this kind of weird chorusing effect going on in the vocals? I don't want to hear a weird chorusing effect. I want to hear it pushed out. So to me, it's like, yeah, you're exactly right. It's not about mixing everything equally in volume. Some instruments and some effects are there just to reinforce. And Eno is a perfect example of that. When if you've seen any of the breakdown, the U2 breakdown stuff, there's some chaotic stuff going on that soloed is like all this stuff, and you're like, I never heard that in a U2 song. You mute it, and you're like, oh, some of the excitement and the air and the width in this song has disappeared. Yeah. And then you unmute it, and you don't know. You're like, oh, that was all that. Like when we interviewed Daniel Lanois, he talked about using all of these multi-effects that he does that he learned while working with Eno. He was incredibly gracious talking about Eno and talking about how influential he was on learning his production stuff. Eno specifically went to work with Daniel Lanois because he loved what Daniel was doing, and then they morphed, they learned from each other, and that was a beautiful thing.
Wow.
But yeah, all of those crazy sounds that are not there to be featured, they're there to add some extra texture to a song. So yeah, it was a really good question.
Well, Warren, thank you very much for your time. I will chat after about how everyone should go and buy the book, but thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights. That was a pleasure and an honor to speak to you about it. Best of luck with the release, and for everyone watching, I will put a link in the description, as YouTubers do these days. Seems to be the most vocalized statement on YouTube now. Link in the description.
Link in the description. Yes, please buy the book. I think you'll absolutely love it. Thank you, Ed, for allowing me to talk about the book with you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. My pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Well, I hope that was insightful. The book really is everything you need to know about recording and producing music in one place. It is out now. Purchase your copy through the links in the description. It's been emotional. I'll see you on the next one.